You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG.
Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries, a podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games where two GMs talk about their recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful you can take to yours. On the show today, we discuss long-term campaign. Hello there, sages and adventurers. My name's Jody, and with me, as always, my good friend and GM colleague, Matt. What, you get to try stuff at the end? I was trying stuff.
No, I like it. You really brought a lot of energy and enthusiasm.
It kind of escalated as it was coming out of me.
You didn't start from the beginning. You started from the middle, and so you kind of lulled me into a false sense of security. I liked that.
Thanks. That's good. You know, that's that false sense of security, that like long, slow build up. That's what we're here for today. Because today's episode focuses on running a long-term campaign in Shadowdark.
That's right.
Something you know a little something about, Matt, so take us to the table.
Can do. So as folks, regular listeners of the show know, we just wrapped reasonably recently at the time of recording our long-term, nearly 3-year Dolmenwood game. And I think all told with like the one-shots and kind of... basically, it came out to just shy of 60 sessions. And we played, I think all those sessions were basically 4 hours. So, 240 hours of table time is, did I do the math correctly, Jody?
I think so. I'm just shocked we did that much. That made it sound real big.
Yeah, and I say that because, well, for two reasons. I know we're not really in the discussion part, but here as I set this up, I think it's important for folks to be able to compare apples to apples when we talk about long-term campaigns. So some folks might see that as being not a long-term campaign, and look at some of these long-term campaigns that have been running since the 70s, or so adjusting expectations for what long-term means to you and I, that this was a long-term campaign for us. It's the longest campaign I've ever run. It's also probably the thing I'm proudest of in terms of accomplishments of my GMing and gaming career. And so what I really want to talk about, though, is not necessarily the setting. We've talked a lot about Dolmenwood. It's amazing. But I don't really want to talk so much about the setting. I want to talk more about Shadowdark and how the system integrated and didn't integrate well with a long-term campaign that was more narrative and character-focused than some of the games I'm actually running right now, specifically like the online Kindly Craw open table game. A much different vibe. And so I because this is a question that comes up all the time, is like, and it's coming up less and less, thank goodness. But the question is Shadowdark good for long-term campaigns? And so here at the top in the take us to the table segment, I want to end by saying that I think Shadowdark is by far and away the best of the OSR systems that I've come across for long-term play. I think it needs very little, perhaps even no tweaks for long-term, even character-focused play. And so hopefully we can dive into some of the reasons that I think that's the case. And maybe, Jody, you can tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, the first reason you're wrong is that you assume
right off the bat.
There it is. Well, you assumed I would disagree with you, and this may be one of those episodes where I am so keen to just tell the internet it's wrong, which is a thing I deeply love doing.
No, I don't think the internet is wrong, because the response is usually the same response that we're probably going to give here. But
and I agree with you. Like let's okay. Both of us just get on the same page of, I thought Shadowdark handled this 3-year narrative-driven campaign beautifully. Let's start at the negative, because there's so many good things to talk about. I'm racking my brain right now to go, where was somewhere where Shadowdark, the system, let us down in this multi-year, regular running, story-driven and sandbox. There were some decided sandbox elements to this
Oh,
campaign.
for sure.
Where did you mentioned some friction? Let's go ahead
Yeah.
and lead with the friction, and then we can have a big love fest at the end of celebrating why it's great for it.
Well, I think you've talked about this before, but I think a lot of the random encounter tables in the core rulebook are very bespoke to a very specific kind of game, and they were much lauded when the game came out that there's all these tables, and I continue to find that making my own encounter tables is important. And the only reason I say this is because Shadowdark's implied setting is baked more into the core rulebook than I think a lot of people maybe fully understand when they pick that book up. There's like a lot of lore that is just sprinkled throughout the core rulebook that means that, like, you know, if you don't necessarily have a particular monster in your setting, or the monsters don't necessarily work the same way that they do in the core rulebook, then those tables aren't as useful for you. And so in the case of running Dolmenwood, you know, those tables weren't as useful, but also the Shadowdark core rulebook and its implied setting was not useful. And so this is from the top, I think the thing that I had to immediately find a way to change. And I think a lot of people come into friction with this, where their setting has drow, or their setting has gnomes, right? This is a very common one. Or their setting has tieflings, or, you know, whatever it is. And the core rulebook doesn't give you, because it's such a tightly integrated system, and the core rulebook is such a kind of gestalt, it is hard without fully renovating sections of the rulebook, whether it be encounter tables or ancestries is kind of another one. There were things that I immediately found friction with and had to do a lot of renovations with right off the bat.
The magic system jumps to mind, as you not only tweaked the magic system, not the mechanical system. It was still roll to cast and tiers of spells and you know, slots relevant to your caster level. All that remained true to what you see as the wizard in the core rulebook. Mm-hmm. However, the way spells function, specifically rune magic, played an important role for us eventually. Is that part of what you're talking about, of feeling some friction, that to play Dolmenwood and have us have an authentic Dolmenwood experience while using the Shadowdark rules? Was the magic one of those things? I mean, the obvious one is like Grimalkin don't exist, and you had to come up with a way to have Grimalkin in terms of ancestries. But what led to the magic getting revamped and becoming like this? I don't know. Mechanically, I feel like that was probably the thing on a player side I felt not needed revision, but got revised multiple times.
So I don't necessarily, I'm going to steer us away from this being the, like, Matt talks about his Shadowdark conversion, because I could talk endlessly about that. I did a lot of work, both necessary, I think, and also unnecessary work. I think the spells fall in the unnecessary category. Okay. They were purely for flavor, and because this was a why do you climb the mountain situation. I just wanted to. It was a challenge. I was interested in it. I like and liked the process of tweaking and tinkering with the system, and I just wanted to have a fully converted player's book to hand you guys. I think what I'm more saying is that I think the spells are actually the thing that's most widely useful in any fantasy game, you know, that kind of has the classic fantasy tropes. Those spells are classics for a reason. Kelsey chose them for a reason, and they are less informed by the setting than other elements of the book. For instance, the goblin having an ancestry is like, you know, that immediately kind of signals to you something about goblins in the implied Shadowdark setting. Well, I don't think the spells necessarily do that, and so I didn't get friction there. We played for 2 years with me kind of slowly drip feeding new spells from the Dolmenwood books that I had converted before I just completely revamped the core rulebook or the player's book, excuse me, and handed you guys a bound copy of this conversion. So I think the first thing in terms of long-term campaigns is that lots of people end up setting them in their own bespoke settings, or a setting that is not tied to the Shadowdark implied setting. That might not be true, and you know, but I think that the folks who are coming from 5th edition or whatever, like a lot of those folks have their own setting that they've been running 5th edition games in, and they might have different ideas, or they might be coming from 5e and want, some of the 5e ancestries or what have you. The second place I found friction, and this is more applicable to anyone running a long-term campaign in any setting, whether it's a Cursed Scroll or not, is, man, there are a couple of things in Shadowdark that kind of drive me bananas. One of them we've talked about endlessly, which is luck. And in a long-term campaign, it is unbelievably important, if a long-term campaign is your goal, to consider the long-term ramifications of early... Like, I set up our luck rules and then regretted them a year and a half later. Like 30 sessions in was when I started to regret the decisions I made at the beginning of the campaign. Of course, I could have changed them, but we had already set a table culture around luck that I felt like I couldn't pull the rug out from under you guys. We did institute like a locked fumbles rule, which helped. Long story short, luck and spellcasting specifically. Spellcasters become especially wizards, become very the roll to cast system becomes less and less significant as they level up. And so if there's one thing that I think there was friction later in the campaign, it was kind of all of these things coming to a head. And I don't know that I could have planned for them, but I do think that like having that long-term outlook, if that's your goal as a GM, it's important to consider not what's going to happen at first level. It's important to consider what's going to happen at like 6th and 7th level, especially with your wizards.
I think that's really good advice. And noting specifically wanting to call out not at 10th level.
No.
Because at 10th level...
And we got to 10th level.
We did. And that's, I think...
we is... a couple of players got to 10th level. Jody...
You gonna rub that in? That really...
I
gotta relive this.
Oh, man.
And relive it. Yeah. Guess who's... Did I win? Do I get like the wooden spoon for the most PC deaths?
It's not even close.
Yeah, that's right. Trail of bodies leading to my dice bag.
Which is, we're definitely going to talk about that in terms of the positives of Shadowdark.
Well, it's one of the things I want to mention of a friction point, but it may be unique to our table with the long-term campaign. Our group, love them. Any who are listening, I mean that. That's my USD, my unintentional sarcasm disorder kicked in right there. I could feel it. Love playing with these people. The most non-optimal, mechanical-minded. I think I and maybe one other player are the only two people who think in terms of optimal, maybe at all. And I don't. Like, if I'm your example of optimized play, we have problems. So I'm curious from my side, I felt it, but I also was the guy running around with 8th level plus characters, and I've got my little 3rd level mook going, God, I hope nobody looks at me, but I can't keep my mouth shut, so somebody's going to look at me. So that lack of optimized play, I felt it.
Yeah.
That certain classes were not fulfilling their role, so to speak, in the traditional sense. And it would occasionally lead to, for me, I'd find dissonance with that. I'd be like, man, I don't know what to do because the people I should be keying off of are doing other things than what I would expect them to do. And, so I feel like there's both a disclaimer there of like, we're talking about this long-term campaign that was very narrative driven. And some of those non-optimal choices were because of narrative arcs that played out. And some of them were player proclivity. I am curious, and this is conjecture, what would it look like if we'd played optimally? How much different would things have been at the end, do you think?
I think the wizard problem would have been a little worse, but actually not that much worse. We had 2 wizards in the party at the end of the campaign, 2 high-level wizards. One of them was basically built exclusively as a utility wizard, so almost no damage-dealing spells, and the other one was basically all damage all the time, all damage all the time.
Oh boy.
What I'll say is this. I think if I had to sort of guess and I had to project out a little bit in terms of some of the stuff that's happening in the Kindly Craw on the open table game, because people are, I mean this also in the best possible sense, like they are optimizing a little bit. Like there's a sense that like in the style of play that we're running, the dungeon is like things are not as narrative, and therefore you don't need to make and shouldn't make choices for your character that are purely based on narrative. So people are making choices to like add ranged weapons or whatever. And what I can see is, depending on the group and depending on how you handle learning and depending on how you handle extra classes, that is going to swing that pendulum. Like there's going to be so many, because you already have an enormous amount of sort of permutations of what a campaign can look like once you start getting up to 7th and 8th level, because of magic items, because of learning, because of really those are the kind of two core things, but also just because of that sense of inertia that a campaign has, where certain characters become narratively or whatever, like good at something, and so you have these like table proclivities that kind of lean into it, even if you're playing optimally. Like I think a lot of tables still end up with this like table inertia that certain players or certain characters do certain things tactically, strategically. Like you have your like way that you operate in combat or whatever. So I don't know if I'm being super clear, but basically, like what I think though is that the allowing additional classes had a fascinating effect on the non-optimization problem. Or I wouldn't even call it a problem, but like it's a problem here because we're trying to solve for what would it look like without this this player proclivity. Here is what I will say. I think, and I know I've said this before, I think limiting the classes to the core 4 classes at the beginning of the campaign is probably the best bet for a long-term campaign, and then possibly adding the additional classes. The reason that I say that is the additional classes they add in an element of I don't know, not unpredictability, but I don't feel like they added what we wanted them to add, and I think that it's harder to, I don't know, it's just harder to understand what the campaign is going to look like. And maybe that doesn't matter, but I don't know. I'm not really making any sense. I didn't like what they did to the game, frankly. That's I guess, and maybe that's just because I'm biased.
I think I agree. Certainly I agree with the core 4 piece of, if you're going to play long term, initially being a little more restrictive around classes, luck tokens, magic item distribution. We've seen this play out now over multiple campaigns, and this long-term campaign, I feel like, really pushed it to the front of how are magic items coming out, how are luck tokens coming out, what classes do people have access to. Those things played out in ways that were unpredictable, I think, is a way of what I would say.
Yeah, not good or bad necessarily, just unpredictable and sometimes a little surprising.
And how are they going to interact with this setting specific to classes was really interesting in Dolmenwood, because, again, the implied setting of Shadowdark is heavier, certainly as you get into those alternative classes. There are much deeper assumptions. When you look at the core 4, wizard, fighter, thief, cleric, priest, that the assumptions are very general. They're very cliche almost. And that's a weirdly good thing. And I'm going to say it's a good thing because of what I found, as I'm going to move to a positive here. One of the things I was blown away with Shadowdark was its adaptability.
Yeah.
That as we moved into rangers or witches or bards or other things, the niche was so narrow that you could feel it having friction against the adaptability of the setting and the system, going, hey, what do you want to do? And those core 4 classes in their very wide brushstrokes allowed those to take on so many different colors and flavors and nuances. And there were things that we never explored. Having two high-level wizards that, other than they both say wizard at the top of their sheet, did almost nothing alike. I mean, could not have been more different, both in my imagined appearance of what they look like is comedically different, and then what they did for the party was totally different. So I think that's one of the things I was blown away, was that on the long-term campaign, I had kind of expected that the rolling random traits or talents and watching kind of the characters evolve would get kind of stale. And you remained very tight-fisted on magic items the whole time.
Very much. I think, I want to talk about this, but yes, I handed out, I could probably count on two hands the number of magic items that I handed out that were of a power level that was significant.
And I think it was in the last 6-7 sessions, 4 or 5 of those showed up. I mean, it was late before we even saw those.
Yeah.
I mean, there were some other doozies that were
the talking bear, which actually I can't really talk about because that is actually a really important spoiler. So I'll just say that. Don't say anything else, Jody. But I mean, the talking bear. That's vague enough and ridiculous enough that it could be many things. But the talking
I'll follow it
bear.
up with that has a sad trombone.
In our game it did.
I was gonna go to the nuclear dagger you gave us that we just took off screen and we're like, nope, doesn't exist. We're getting rid of that.
Oh yeah.
But the system remained comfortable and adaptable, and I think that's a celebration of also our group, that we weren't looking to optimize the whole time. Far from it. That the system just kept breathing. As weird as that sounds, mechanically Shadowdark, even into late levels, even into many sessions, at no point was it the lift mechanically is getting kind of heavy. It just stayed there doing this very quiet background support, which is why, if somebody cornered me and said, what's your favorite thing about Shadowdark? It's it quietly supports my game.
Yeah.
And it did that for 3 years.
So I want to ask you as a player, though. So on this, because I completely agree. I completely agree that one of the nice things about Shadowdark is that it gets out of the way when you need it to get out of the way, and it's there when you need procedures. So we didn't go in very many dungeons in the latter half of the campaign. We ended with this 5 or 6 session dungeon crawl that we talked about on our previous episode. But honestly, we spent most of the time hex crawling. That was kind of the primary way that we experienced Shadowdark. And the hex crawling rules that we used were a kludge of the hex crawling rules in the Dolmenwood player's book and the kind of slow drip of Western Reaches and Cursed Scroll 4 rules from Shadowdark, and as Kelsey's been releasing them for the Western Reaches, I've been kind of combining them. I don't think that necessarily we can give a good and honest appraisal of a long-term hex crawl using the core rules. What I can say is I do not like the core book hex crawling rules. They produce encounters at an unbelievably at a rate that is astounding. And I really like the Cursed Scroll 4 rules for their simplicity. And I think my ultimate favorite are the current kind of work in progress, linked in a pinned comment, Western Reaches hex crawling rules. They are very close to what we ended up using in our game for the vast majority of it. And what I wanted to ask you as a player, that's all preamble, is what did you think of, this was a hex crawling campaign. People love to dunk on hex crawling games because they're boring, they're all procedural, travel sucks, it's not fun, it's not interesting. Did you enjoy the travel? I want an honest appraisal. Where did Shadowdark and the system and the stuff that I came up with kind of let you down? What would you have wanted to see? I don't know. This isn't a purely Shadowdark specific thing, but let's talk a little bit about hex crawling because we can't not.
Absolutely. The there is no shortage of hexes to crawl in Dolmenwood. If Dolmenwood got anything to sell, the Dolmenwood product is, say, do you like, yo dog, I heard you like hexes. There it is. Because, boy, howdy. I mean, the day I was sitting looking, I'm going to get to an answer, but I'm staring at the player diegetic general Dolmenwood map. Mm-hmm. And the day I realized it has hexes hidden in what is basically just an art map, and there's like hidden hexes on the just artistic rendering, and then realizing there are hexes in those hexes.
It's the greatest map of all time.
Like my head spun. So with that in place, of course the hex crawling was intensely enjoyable because it was, we have entered a new hex. What is in this hex?
Everything.
These 12 things. Okay, cool. We are on a strict timeline. Matt says, you notice a strange twinkling light just off the road. Okay, we have to have a 5-minute discussion of, do we have time to go look at the small twinkling light off the side of the road? Because that will lead us to another thing. That will lead us to another thing. And oh God, we're lost in the woods. I could have done with more lost because apparently I'm a sadist or something. I wish we'd gotten lost in the woods a little bit more.
Yes.
Not in the late campaign when it was winter and we were tromping around the woods. That sucked and was bad. So hats off to you. Hiking through the woods in the middle of winter in a snowstorm blows. It's not good. Don't do that, especially when you have
those are some of my favorite sessions
of 3.
I loved those sessions because they really sort of left me going like, all right, whether or not the rules are
or not.
whether or not the rules are fun, that played out exactly as it should have.
The latter hex crawling rules we used, I found really enjoyable. I really liked those, the camp roles and the marching order and how you use resources, the resource management. Again, praise of Shadowdark. It's just enough. I got to pay my tax, but it's not so much that it feels like a pain in the butt. Having a wagon was amazing. We were, a little flippant and foolish with it at the end, but once we got a wagon, it felt like a huge win and was a big deal, which is one of those. I think it's unfair to give it to credit to OSR exclusively that like, ooh, having a wagon's dope. But it's also a very OSR-y thing to go, I got a wagon. I have a horse. Yeah. We had horses. Oh boy. So I think with the disclaimer that you have a dense, rich hex crawling environment. Yeah. Yes. And I would argue to a degree that if you enjoy the Shadowdark random tables, you like the level of whimsy, or I think of them as extreme. That's my like little bit of bristle at the random tables for forests and ruins and this and that, is they range from very kind of silly mundane to, oh my God, it's the Tarrasque. And it's like, why? There's a big gap between, 2 goblins flicking boogers at each other to the Tarrasque. That's a lot. However, if every hex I go in has a couple of those events, that's pretty engaging stuff. And it becomes fun to just go wander around in the woods. I think it was interesting that at the end of the campaign, that was a sentiment that I think just about every character held, or every player held, was, I want to come back, even if it's not with these characters, just to wander around the woods a little bit more. That's pretty special. And I think, I don't know how much of that I can lay at the feet of Shadowdark. In praise of Shadowdark, the mechanics allowed for that beautifully. And they weren't in the way, and they also made it non-trivial, that there was a limit to how long we could be out there. In praise of Dolmenwood,
the setting is awesome.
The setting's awesome, and the more you wander in it, the weirder and more familiar it gets, which is like, there's like I would love to sit down in a group of like 15 people to hear them tell Dolmenwood stories, which is a statement I think I will say of 0 other role-playing games. That like, I would actually like people to talk about, oh, this weird thing happened, because it will genuinely be weird.
Yeah. Okay. So that sounds amazing. And that I'm just thinking about some of the hexes you guys didn't go to, and I would just love to like hear. It's one of those rare things.
The tree gate between Prigwort and
Castle Brackenwold,
and there's a tree gate, so
the
to speak.
Hench Gate.
The Hench Gate. Fascinating.
Yeah.
Hey, did you go through the Hench Gate? Yeah, we did. What was it like for you guys?
And it's
did you go to that rock?
The
one just to the south? Yes. What was that like?
Yeah, you guys never investigated that. I'm not going to tell you what it is. It's one of those few things where I'm like, yeah, actually tell me about your character, tell me about your role-playing game. So in praise of Shadowdark here, this is what I want to say to this point, which is that Shadowdark is customizable. Like, I grafted on an entire hex crawling rule set, changed it multiple times, and it didn't matter. Like like I used the sort of sensibilities, and I used the core rules as a guide. Like, everything kind of mattered in terms of the various mechanics of the game. For instance, using the standard DCs for these sleeping checks that are augmented by the time of year, so the season, and then whether or not you have a campfire and whether or not you have a tent or a bedroll. Like, I actually think that that's something that I would love to see in the Western Reaches rules, which I don't think we're going to, is that level of granularity to make a campfire, a bedroll, and a tent, like those three things, that kind of a triangle of important accoutrement for camping. I would love to see that, because it ends up augmenting a bunch of different things and so
the encumbrance impact is weirdly important. Exactly.
And that's the thing that I think was so great about leveraging Shadowdark in this regard, was that there are simple mechanics that are meaningful, and they're meaningful at every level. And so this is where I want to take this conversation next. I'm taking over the MC chair here, Jody, and I'm going to ask you another question. So one of the I think we're going to end with character death, because that's the I don't want to talk about it right now.
Okay.
I want to talk about,
it's a good setup. Thanks.
Yeah, because I do want to talk about character death. But I want to give you some time, because I just gave you a hard time about it, so we'll give you some time to calm down. We'll talk about it at the end of the episode. Here's what I want to ask you, Jody. There's two things I think that Shadowdark leverages, and I want your kind of analysis on whether or not they were challenges throughout the campaign. Because I think that in a long-term campaign, oftentimes, in for instance, Dungeons and Dragons, 2014, 2024, whatever it is, inventory becomes almost irrelevant. The 5e game I'm running right now, I tried tracking encumbrance, kind of abstracted, and now we're like, everybody's got 16 lances and, rations for, it's like, who cares? All right, whatever. But in Shadowdark, inventory space is at a premium. Did you feel like the slot-based encumbrance system mattered throughout the campaign? And did you feel like torches, lanterns, and light mattered throughout the campaign?
Yes. No.
Okay.
There we go. We're all done. Next question. I love doing that.
I have failed in my sacred charge.
Where were we? Encumbrance, yes. I mean, if you listen to our Horblight Keep episode just a couple back, you commented on the fact that we left winter cloaks on the boat outside the keep and then went wandering into a frozen keep.
Still
was bad for a couple people.
See earlier discussion of not optimized.
Not optimized. I will collectively give all six of us just completely not thinking about that until we were up to our knees in snow and going, oh, it'd be helpful here. So, but I mean, why did we do that? To make room in our inventory. My last two characters for many hours of play were thieves. Boy, howdy, do thieves rarely, I wasn't lucky enough to have a thief with an unusually high strength. That was not the character or the dice that the character was presented to me. I had a high dex, and that's all. And so those 10 slots were precious. And as the person who's constantly walking around finding stuff, because I do take that part of my thieving very personally and importantly, the amount of times I went, this is cool. Who wants it? Oh, neat. Who wants this? Oh, that's cool. Here, you should take this. Like that, I felt like a broken record. Like, well, I guess I'll just leave it. Why? I can't carry it, you guys. Like, come on, somebody pick it up. You're strong. Oh, okay, what do you have? Like 75 rations. Bah, why? And there was a reason to have 75 rations. Because we spent so much time for the second part, because we spent so much time overland.
Yes.
We didn't need torches as much as we probably
You needed
otherwise
them for
could
campfires.
Mm-hmm.
But I will agree, for light purposes, that is something of an interesting implication.
I think you could have been more stingy with us about some of the taxing us when we were overland. I felt like, and this may not be true.
Sure.
I felt like we got to kind of fudge that sometimes. Whether it was we were between places and it was between sessions, and when we came back, it wasn't, which is a normal spot of like, oh, hey, you guys we ended one session here, and on the ending scene is them walking down the road to the next town. We're not going to pick up next session on the road. We're going to pick up next session at the place to get.
Oh, this is interesting.
Fun.
Yes.
Well, we didn't start that session with Matt going, don't forget, you guys, you owe me 3 torches. You could have, though.
Oh, interesting.
And we didn't do a ton of it, but it did happen.
Yes. No, that is an interesting point. And I think this is actually one of the tensions that I think I had in a long-term Shadowdark game is if you're running a narrative game, there is a tension between that granular tracking of slots and rations and torches and time and rounds, etc., with the desire for, as the campaign progresses, more sort of grandiose heroism, if that's the kind of vibe you're going for, which wasn't really the vibe that I was going for. Like, we never really reached the like super heroic or even, you
didn't have the table for that. I'm gonna speak for the group and go, we good. But that's not our vibe.
But like, I do think that an important thing to consider for long-term play in Shadowdark is that those, like, I do feel like I failed a little bit. That's great feedback, and I don't think the failure undermined the quality of the game necessarily, but I do think that, like, as far as adhering to the principles of Shadowdark and the things that make the system kind of run and sing, that's good feedback to know that slots mattered. That makes me very happy. That was something that I really wanted to be a consistent and constant sort of difficulty, because at one point in the campaign, your stuff was in like 4 or 5 different places. At your tavern back in Prigwort, where you had some stuff. That was one 3x5 note card. Then you had a cart that was another 3x5 note card. You had some stuff in a place that you never went back to in Dreg, I think, that was like in another cart that you basically left.
Oh, yeah. You're right.
And we never saw that stuff again. That card never got pulled out. And then you had a boat, and then you had like the characters. So I guess in terms of stuff that was actually relevant, you had 4 different locations for your stuff. It makes me think of the George Carlin, a place for my stuff. You go to Hawaii, you got to take your stuff. You go to another island. Oh no, what do I take? Yeah. Anyways,
we had those conversations of what stuff are we taking?
Yes, and it didn't happen all the time, but it was fun to watch that thread get pulled thin, like to watch the sweater thread get pulled, and to watch things kind of like, there was a point where someone was like, hey, where is this thing? And it was not where you needed it to be.
It's back at Castle Brackenwald. It's like, we don't have any stuff there. Well, but that's where that thing is.
So I'm super glad to hear that. I understand the implications around light, and I was feeling that, but I also felt like and that's interesting feedback again to the kind of hand waving of certain things and
I mean, I don't want to glaze past the like overland travel.
Yeah.
And other than the torches at night, we did also have a ranger in the party, so it made navigating some of that gathering a little bit easier.
Totally.
Which was, again, either rad or like, we kind of like that class shortchanged that dynamic. You know, it was a great experience for us as players. Like, loved that there was a ranger in the party. At times, like mechanically, the GM, me in the background is going like, man, I wish we were having to get into that. You did something incredibly smart early on that was another thread of of long-term campaign that I think is a point that if somebody is in a long-term campaign, you got to find this answer. I am starting to feel this tension in my Saltmarsh game. And you mentioned not long ago, one of the places we had our stuff was at our inn that we owned. The financial strain is one of the very few areas of Shadowdark for a long-term campaign.
Oh, I completely forgot about this. This is so good.
This is a gap. I'm just going to call it what it is. There is a gap in Shadowdark that I think is very fillable. There's a lot of creative solutions. You found a kind of fun say yes solution and then turned it into an oh no solution. In a way, I'm glad I could inadvertently help you do that with one of my characters that wandered off. So talk about, there's a financial, I'm talking around it.
No.
You need to financially hit your characters. And this is a thing, when we got to talk to Kelsey on the show long ago, and I asked her what's your economy based on? And she was like, it's a diamond, that a diamond's value is basically a gold piece a day. And I kind of went, a gold piece a day is this core number that exists. If you want to calibrate your economy to Shadowdark, it's a gold piece a day is the living wage, so to speak.
Yeah, and kind of the expenses or whatever.
Right, you want to end up around there. But heroes going to be heroes, players going to be players. You're going to go in the gilded hole and find an extract value. Even our group who was like, I'll have none of this wealth, give me story. No. We ended up with money at times. And you needed a way to separate us from it. And you did it in the least fun, most fun way possible.
Bureaucratic horror.
That might be when you laid out the bill and they started processing it and I went, I gotta go. And I walked out of the room.
You left.
And the realization of when I came back that one of the players was like, dude, what did you do? Nothing. It was great. That's in my top 5. For sure.
I'm going to tell this story just very briefly. So basically, Jody was playing this character who made some deals away from the party with
their consent,
with a couple of purveyors, one of some pipe leaf and another of some illicit substances to put in, basically to make people drink more of your beer from the at the tavern that you owned. But this was in a town that was very far away from Prigwort, your starting town, and the town in which you owned your tavern. And this dude makes these deals, signs them in the name of the Mirror Guild, the name of your party / the owners of the Oath and the Oast in Prigwort, and then bails from the party to just live in this town. The party takes numerous sessions to get back to Prigwort, and when they arrive, the shipment has arrived, and alongside it, a bill from the collections agency. I mean, some of the most fun role-playing sessions were them trying to navigate this I think I played the person at the tax collector's office, the woman from the Monsters Inc., the Mike Wazowski.
Always watching Wazowski.
And really forced them to, and these were huge gold sums that were thousands of gold pieces because of inspection fees and
holding fees because the deliveries had showed up when we were away.
Yeah, and just a number of different sort of important and processing fees, very Ticketmaster adjacent. Was sort of my inspiration was and it was very fun, but you are correct that I had not. This was when I realized that I had not correctly adjusted the gold pieces from a couple of OSE, a couple of Dolmenwood adventures, which are based in kind of the old school essentials, BX gold piece value world. I hadn't adjusted those correctly. I had under adjusted them. And so you guys actually had too much gold for what you could spend it on. And so this was, in many ways, a narrative decision that was born out of a mechanical decision, a need to adjust. However, I do think that what you said stands, on its own. You need, in a long-term campaign, you must find more gold sinks, because characters just, if you're using the core book carousing tables will not be enough. There's there isn't enough incentive to do those big carousing rolls, at least not from what I've seen. The XP gain drops off in terms of usefulness when you start getting to the point where those huge amounts of gold pieces are being accrued. It just hasn't, it has, and also the way that we were running carousing and downtime for a while was that it took a full week, which is another thing that I think is important, is to understand what downtime means. Like, does it mean every time you come back to town, or is it in between expeditions and adventures? And so I'm going to wrap that into this kind of portion of the program here, which is that you need a gold sink, and you need that gold sink to be tied probably to downtime in a meaningful way, and therefore you need to define downtime. You also need a gold sink to be things you can buy. I just love the upkeep of a tavern or like a base of operations. I think every single, if you can make it, and I think this is coming out in Western Reaches, there's like some Bastion rules that are in the works, but if you can make it so that players have a little base of operations, it doesn't
fixer upper.
But it doesn't even have to be the part of the core gameplay loop. It's just a place they come back to every so often and invest money in. Like, I do think that there's a lot of value in that. It does require, grafting on a system or whatever, but I don't know. How did you, because I gotta be honest with you, I think I used different mechanics every single downtime to determine how much money you were making and what the expenses were. But like, how did you find the base of operations?
Oh, I found it great, especially because my characters died so frequently that I rarely ever got to use it. It was wonderful.
Let's talk about that. You broached this up. I want to hear from you. Again, I'm just taking over the MC.
What
role.
It's like to have your character die every session?
Jody. Okay.
Look,
I killed a lot of Jody's characters.
At least you admit it now.
However, the number one concern about running long-term games of Shadowdark is the characters are going to die too often for there to be a cohesive narrative story. What are your thoughts about that from a player perspective? I'm going to give you my thoughts from a DM perspective but I don't want to poison the well. I don't know that we've actually really talked about this. So I guess let me reframe it. Did you find it hard to introduce new characters to the game?
It depends, is the answer. Unfortunately, which is my least favorite answer to, I think, any question, is it depends. As time went on and I became more familiar with Dolmenwood itself, it became less challenging to introduce new characters. There was an element also of new character who dis and just like letting it rip, so to speak, for a while. And I just want to be clear. I exaggerated. I don't know what the count is at, but I think it's 6. Off the top of my head, there's 6.
There are
bodies buried throughout Dolmenwood.
Well, that includes the character that you retired at level 6.
Okay. And the bard retiring was that I'm stand by that decision. I'm glad I did it. I think it was fun.
I've never seen somebody throw away a level 6 character, and it was, kudos to you for doing that.
Okay. I was happy to see him go. I'm glad he got a kind of happy ending in as much as he deserved. And it was very narratively satisfying. So that was extremely satisfying. What was important, what became enjoyable, and what was my out and thing that I started enjoying, not about my characters dying. That was a bummer each time. What became workable and fun was finding ways to tie them into the world in the campaign. And I think initially that was hard because I didn't understand Dolmenwood enough to even know what to ask you about, like, could this character be like this or like that? So, that in a long-term campaign, losing a character sucks. It just does. Like, there's no two ways about it. There's a Colville video out there, and the advice he gives is excellent. You do this really well. We got a lot of practice because you kept killing my characters. Of the player, Matt kills one of his players' characters. They go through an unfortunate situation and somebody dies. And the guy comes back, builds his new character, and then they're off and roll once they kind of recover from this really disappointing thing. And he says, hey, when you kill one of my characters, just let me be pissed for 30 minutes and then let me get excited about my new character, and then we'll rock and roll. And I really did feel that way. Like, not that I was pissed at you, but I was like, damn it, this character died. I wish they hadn't. I was enjoying playing them. Okay, well, let me start rolling up the new one because I would like to continue playing in the game. So let me start rolling. Oh, that's kind of interesting. Oh, that's kind of a fun quirk. Oh, I wonder if it could be. Ooh, and then you start developing new ideas. And, within the span of less than an hour of game time, new character is, wandering onto screen with funny voice and quickly making friends in the party. And that becomes fun over and over and over again. So I think just in terms of Shadowdark mechanically, I think I'm gonna scoop your lead here.
Go ahead.
It's pretty tough to die. Like that's
Yep.
just it. Is man, if there is ever a thing that is, if you are from the OSR and you look at Shadowdark, and I'm talking BXOSE, you shouldn't see it and go, this seems lethal. And I don't see that. It's if you are coming from 5e, yeah, it feels lethal and deadly. It's not. It's just not. Almost all of my characters' deaths were bad luck, ill timing. I legitimately, I only think of one of them that I go, you killed that character.
Yeah, there's one of them.
There's one that I went, nah, Matt killed my character. And every other one of them was like, nah, stuff happens. And like I said, especially when you're, I think 4th or 5th level thief running around with 12 hit points and a bunch of 8th level characters.
Yeah.
You're on borrowed time, buddy. Sooner or later, you're going to get got. And he did. So,
Yep.
The level gap did catch up to me. Like I felt that. I felt like
That was going to be my last question.
Yeah.
but
The level gap, I enjoyed that. I liked it.
I like it too.
I wish there had been a way for other people to have that experience. Not really, but like it would have been nice to have it move around a little bit more.
Totally.
But I did enjoy playing those characters that, as long as people weren't being like, hey, well, Jody's character go do this thing. Like that just meant I was like, I'm not playing one of those characters. I'm not playing a fighter.
Yeah.
Because I can't do that if I'm 5 levels behind you guys.
So there's a couple things I'm going to say from a GM's perspective. First of all, I did institute a level floor, and the level floor was roughly equivalent to the number of years we've been playing. I don't know if you noticed this.
No, I did not. That's
or the year that we were in. So year 2 of the campaign, the level floor was 2. Year 3 of the campaign, the level floor was 3. And I actually don't think that that's a terrible way of doing it. I actually think that like level floors are like, I think starting at level 1 is great, but I also think that there's a reason to just like give a little bit of a boost to like level 2. And that's to taste. I don't think it's necessary. I think it's fun to start at level 1 still. You'll level up very quickly back into the levels that you need to be. But I do think that a little bit of a level floor, the third year of this campaign, the last 20 or so sessions, we have like level 7, level 8, level 9 characters. Well, coming back at level 1 in that circumstance is going to be that actually does create in a narrative campaign some tension that I think is unsatisfying. However, on the sort of subject of death and character death, I have 2 thoughts about this. The first is that I think if you want to run a long-term campaign, you need a way to tie characters to the setting that is not a single party goal. Like, because it is very likely that you're going to churn through an entire party's worth of characters, and the characters that you start the campaign with will not be the ones that you finish them with. And that means that giving characters some grand thing that they have to care about from the beginning of the campaign just ain't going to work. You have to structure your campaign differently than you would in like a 5th edition. The quest giver says the world is ending, and then you spend 20 levels trying to save the world, and it's pretty unlikely that all of the characters are going to die. Well, what you need is something to ground them in the setting and something to ground them in the world. And what Dolmenwood does is, and I think these are great, is for every single ancestry, they give a set of beliefs, like a D10 or a D12 list of beliefs about the setting, and a D12 list of goals. You can roll on it, you can choose, or you can just use them as inspiration. And what those do, and they're subtle and not so subtle, is they actually, and this is brilliant on Gavin Norman's part, they are both weird quirks of the character, and unbeknownst to the players maybe, they are essentially just rumors. Like believing that elves aren't from the Fae is just something to make you engage with elves and the Fae. Like it's, and some tables won't like those because they tell the character something about, but what I think is that tying the characters to the setting, not to a quest, is very important. And then secondarily, on that same note, in terms of getting them integrated with the actual, the cast of characters that didn't die, what I think is important is using factions. Like I think that factions, and we just did an episode on this, but I think that factions are important because when you create a character, you can align them with a faction, and that immediately gives them a more inertia in the world. So in a long-term Shadowdark campaign, I think it's important for new characters to walk onto the stage, so to speak, with grounding in the setting. I don't think it's particularly important or a particularly good idea to do the long-term, quest giver at level 1. This quest is going to take you from levels 1 to level 3, right? Because then you're going to be trying to piecemeal together and backfill why the characters are all doing this quest. Instead, my last bit, and these are all kind of takeaways, but also these are things that they're specifically tied to death. The first 3 levels of your campaign need to be figuring out who the characters are. Because even though Shadowdark isn't that deadly, a group coming from 5th edition, and that's, those are the kinds of groups that want an answer to this question of can you play long-term narrative games? You will cycle through characters. What I see that as is basically, for those tables, this is just a long-term gauntlet, essentially. But it's a gauntlet that you're learning the system, you're learning the characters, you're learning the world, you're learning more about the factions. It's a player information input. And you can do it to level 3, do it to level 2, whatever you want, but you need to get those characters to a place where they're going to be more survivable. Level 3 is about the point where I think like this character ain't going to die unless something really bad happens, or if there's a huge level discrepancy and they get hit by a Baylor or whatever. Great. Or hit by a Banshee.
I hear that can happen.
Banshee Keen. Long story short, I think you do have to think about the campaign and the tiers of play in different ways as they relate to character death. I think tables like my Kindly Craw game, dude, no one's died. And no one's died because people are playing carefully, they are smart, they are thoughtful, and they are using all the tools to overcome obstacles.
Even in our non-optimized play group, everybody went, when the priest fails to cast Cure Wounds.
Yeah.
Everybody stops and goes, so you can't cast Cure Wounds? No, I can't. Okay. Shift gears.
Right.
And I mean, that is in the least optimized play group that you're going to find. That's going to have more fun than, as much fun as any table. Also, case in point on character death is we only had one of our 6 players still rocking their first character. Everybody else was on seconds, thirds, whatever it may have been.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody was exempt. Like I'm hamming it up here about my characters getting got, because it's funny. But
a lot of those characters die in the first 3 levels.
Right. And that piece about factions is so important of both learning the world in those early sessions. So if you want something of like, I really want to play a long-term campaign, I think it's reasonable to say with a little planning for your initial sessions, figure out some ways to have the party bumping up against a couple factions at a they're interacting on a micro level with somebody tied to a macro level faction. So you've got, this thing in the South or this thing in the East, or good versus evil, and then there's a few lieutenants. I don't know what it is.
Sure.
But early on, we learned Prigwort was being infiltrated by a disease, so to speak. And that story continued up until the end of our campaign. It was still, it never was on the screen full force in the terms of like us dealing with that faction. We interacted and we fought with it a bunch, but we never really acknowledged that front, if you will, that big threat. But even in right before we went into our very closing arc, a lot of what we were doing was, off the edge of the screen, smoke rising in the distance. And we know what that is.
Yeah.
We're choosing to just, put our heads down and wander the other way.
You got other fish to fry, man.
Yeah. And I want to ask you that if we can close out maybe here on factions, is long-term campaign. And I'm feeling this with my campaign as we are we're in it enough that things seem to be heading this long-term direction. I don't think we're probably not wrapping up this summer. I'm already noticing factions and story threads that are just kind of shriveling. And I'm like, I think I'm just going to let that go unless they go stomping back over it again. To what degree did the long-term campaign, and was there anything about Shadowdark? Is that just the nature of a long-term narrative campaign, or is just being willing to let certain, story arcs come and go? To what degree did you control the story arcs and the factions, or was it more just following us running around being knuckleheads in the woods?
I started by using the Mouse Ritter faction turn system, mostly because it gave me some context for how the factions were interacting. But frankly, eventually, what I did was just once I knew the world, and once it was, I'll be honest, like this was a very character focused game in comparison to kind of a perhaps more traditional OSR style, but it wasn't a character focused game like, a 5th edition game where like the world is bespoke for the characters. Like we weren't really investigating people's backstories very much. That was replaced by kind of deep probing of factions, like the church and the Cold Prince and the human nobility. And really what I used the factions for was to make the world feel real. But in a narrative game, I'll be honest, the big things that were happening in terms of the factions were always meant to kind of create drama. So the Succession story that played out kind of off screen that you guys learned about through posters and, the town crier running through, like those were things that I didn't know if you'd care about them, but they were texture, but they were dramatic texture that mattered. And sometimes those things ended up being big deals and sometimes they didn't. But I think my want for people who are interested in running long-term campaigns with Shadowdark is to lean into some of those OSR style procedural elements to the degree that they help you tell your story. Like, I think there's this dichotomy between procedure and narrative and stuff like that like continues to just rear its ugly head on the internet and in spaces where like, those things seem antithetical or in some way, anathema to each other. And to me, procedures were very useful early when it came to factions, and very, very, I tried, man. Like there were some times where I was like, okay, I'm going to sit down and do these faction turns, but there was so much inertia behind some of these factions. It was like, I don't have time for this. Like I'm going to write what happens because I know what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I thought that was very interesting that the procedures were there when I needed them and they fell away when I didn't. And again, I'm not running a procedural game. I'm running this like kind of narrative game that's mixed with lots of OSR elements where I found them useful. And so that meant that over the course of 3 years, the game changed a lot. And the way that it ran changed a lot. I changed as a GM a lot, and I wanted to try new things or whatever. And so that's very interesting that I think the faction stuff actually captured a lot of those changes behind the scenes.
I think that's pretty well said. And now in hindsight of hearing you walk through that, especially when you just said, I evolved as a GM through that. I won't say I'm choked up, but like the reminiscing is real here. So I'm going to take a minute to compose my thoughts, and we're going to hear from a sponsor.
This episode is brought to you by the Jaunty Horn, aka the Horny John Tavern and Inn, the home of the 6-foot drinking horn. Located on the scenic Ditchway path from Drag to Langshorn, the Jaunty Horn is a welcome sight for beleaguered travelers. The high gabled inn spans the entire road like a bridge, so you can't miss it. Molish and Jezebel, the proprietors of the establishment, will welcome you in, and a Pilston's Heartbreaker will be in front of you before you can say hi, Wold. For the most adventurous of your party, you can try your hand at the nightly arm wrestling contest. Or, for the hollow leg types, you can test your mettle against the fabled drinking horn. The next time you need a place to rest your head and stable your horses in the Highwold, warm your bones and your spirit at the Jaunty Horn, a.k.a. the Horny John. The Jaunty Horn is granted charter by House Mabley in accordance with the laws and treaties of the Duchy of Brackenwald. This advertisement was paid for by the proprietors.
All right, let's bring this topic into the light a second time.
It's
All
too
right.
early.
What?
It's too early. Anyways, you
To
were
bring
early.
things into the light?
Well, you came in right during the swing, man.
I was crisp off the swing,
All
and
right.
you know it. Hey, you were the MC. I'm the MC. You're the storyteller. That's definitely not caused any issues in the last 30 seconds. So why don't you bring this topic into the light and give us a core takeaway from our discussion?
All right, so the first core takeaway is, can you run long-term campaigns with Shadowdark? The answer is yes. However, should you? Also, yes. This is one of those rare instances that not only can you, should. Yes, there we go. Okay, what's yours?
Do the damn thing. Would you like to take a walk in the woods? Would you like to delve dungeons? Do you like flirting with factions? Well, in a long-term campaign, you should do all those things, because in a long-term campaign, you got time. So variety. Do change it up. Sometimes they're camping. Sometimes they're in palaces, and sometimes they're slumming it on the streets. That variety is so important, and it's something Dolmenwood's setting does beautifully, and mechanically, because of the cleanliness and unity of Shadowdark's rules, it will support you systemically to do that. So just keep things changing.
All right, so my second and final takeaway is actually about death. The thing that I didn't say that I wanted to save until the conclusion is, I think if you ever watch an actual play of a 5th edition game or whatever, or narrative game, that the times where there's the heaviest narrative moments are always around character death. And I actually think that character death happens infrequently enough in Shadowdark, especially if you kind of mitigate it with luck or even just max hit points at first level, which I actually don't think is necessary. I think you can actually indulge in it in a way that you can't always in a 5th edition game, because there's an expectation that in heroic fantasy games, your character will survive. In Shadowdark, there's an expectation that they will die, I think, for a lot of groups. And when it happens, you, especially if that character is level 3, level 4, level 5, etc., you can indulge in it, and it can be one of those big, gratifying narrative moments. When your last elf died, we had a very nice, kind of sweet, touching moment. It didn't take very long at the table, but it was important that we honored that character in a way that was commensurate with what you brought to them. And so I think it's great that stories that are told over a long period of time can have those moments, and you're not denied those moments by the system saying you have to kill a character almost in order to get those moments. Here, they're infrequent, but they're also not vanishingly rare.
Yeah, I think that's well said. If you can get through those first few levels, you're probably in it for the long haul. And after those first couple levels, man, you want to give those players, those characters their due. They spent their time on stage, and give them a fitting exit. And I appreciate that you gave me that over and over and over again. Early on in if you're going for a long-term campaign, you're like, I got a stable group. We're going to do this for a while. My suggestion is this: in those first half a dozen sessions, think about giving a little more direction and a little more support, whether it's introduction to factions, not from a narrative sense, but like they play and bump up against them. Don't tell them, show them. Or having a specific quest giver that maybe you can pull off screen, or give them ways to access the world, especially if you're in a really bespoke setting, so that the players can learn in that world and live in it and breathe in it a little bit, and then just latch onto their stories. Where's their interest? And you do the classic narrative thing, and that's what you gave us. And, everybody is sad to be departing Dolmenwood, but also anxious for another go. So can't wait to see what happens next. As the torchlight grows dim, we hope you were able to find something useful in this episode that you can take into a future game. If you have any questions or unique experiences from your table that you'd like us to discuss in a future episode, you can email us at dmdiariespod@gmail.com. You can also reach out via YouTube or Facebook, but best of all, get us on the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadowdark Discord channel. You can find links to those feeds and any of the materials we reference in this episode's show notes. Until next time, may your taverns be horny jaunts and your shadows be dark.
Dungeon Master Diaries is a production of the Stingbat Radio Network. It is produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by me, Matt Bruner. Our intro and outro music is composed by Christian Schuster, and Dungeon Master Diaries is an independent production and is not affiliated with the Arcane Library, LLC. Shadowdark RPG is a product of the Arcane Library. Copyright 2023.
I think that was fun. You don't like this?
I like it. Just, I don't know about that one.
What about him?
It was all over the place.